Star, thank you so much for moderating this phenomenal but much needed discussion and event. I am very pleased to be sitting here with this outstanding panel tonight. Again, talking about a discussion that is at the forefront in 2020. When you look at the collective PAC in our work, we are really about reducing the gaps within representation for the Black community all across the country. When you look at how many people, Black people are in this country, it makes up about 13%. At a minimum, we should have at least 13% when we're looking at our representation. And from our standpoint, in order to change the laws and the policies and the practices that have been hindering our communities for so long, you have to be able to change the lawmakers. So I don't want to hold us up too long because we have an outstanding panel tonight. But Star, thank you again, and I will leave it to our panelists now.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I really want to thank the collective PAC for all you do for all of us. We will see you a little bit later in the program as we wrap up. But now, please allow me to introduce you to our featured speakers. Congresswoman Marcia Fudge from Ohio's 11th District, Ms. Kim Foxx, Cook County State's Attorney, that's Chicago, Illinois, and Mr. Ben Crump, one of our nation's top civil rights attorneys. Tonight, we're going to begin with Congresswoman Marcia Fudge. Congresswoman Fudge has served the people of Ohio for more than 3 decades, beginning with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. She was later elected as the first African-American and first female mayor of Warrenville Heights, Ohio. She was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 2008, and again, she represents the people of the 11th Congressional District of Ohio. Congresswoman, I'm so glad to be able to chat with you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be with you, my friend.
Absolutely. And so, sister, we've been having conversations over this season of unrest and question. And I'd love for you to set the table for us. In 2014, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and then Tamir Rice. We started to get a live look at the inequities and recklessness in policing Black communities, something that hadn't been broadcasted really since the days of the Civil Rights Movement. And with you personally being around the Tamir Rice talk and from your unique vantage point as a former prosecutor and now member of Congress, I wonder if you might talk to us about this buildup.
Well, let me just first say that what we're seeing now is no different than what we saw when John Lewis first tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. When he tried to cross it and they saw such violence was on television. When people saw it, before it was just Black people fighting, just Black people complaining. But once the white people saw it, their sense of justice and injustice raised its head. And they said, no, we cannot allow this to happen in this, the greatest nation in the world. And I think what is happening right now is the same. We have about police violence for as long as I can remember. The city of Cleveland alone has had 3 different consent decrees in the last 25 years for excessive use of force. We knew this was going on. And so I think that what happens over these last few years, at least, is that people are becoming more aware, those not in our communities. So it gave us the power to start to talk about what's happening within our communities.
And so as we see this buildup, it's as if the issues surrounding criminal justice reform have been a simmering pot on a stove that was either destined to burn up or simmer over. To what do you attribute this new intensity and now universal call for criminal justice reform? Because as you said, it used to be just Black people upset, and now it's people all over the world.
Well, one thing that people need to understand, like you or me or some of us, are in these institutions of power, whether they be the prosecutor's office or on the bench, but in particular the prosecutor's office, we have a power that we didn't have before. And so we raise a different level of consciousness about what's going on because we have power and we're not afraid to use it. So the first thing we do is say to police officers, we're not going to overcharge people anymore. We're going to let you treat them fairly like you treat everyone else. We are going to put in place things like diversion programs. Steffi Tubbs Jones, who was the prosecutor, the first and only Black prosecutor in our county led what I call a public law firm, the biggest in the state of Ohio. And what we did was we made sure that every single person that came before us received justice. So Stephanie had the power to put in place a diversion program where we saved an awful lot of people. But as a result of a diversion program, then came a drug court because so many of our young people were getting put in jail solely for using drugs. Then came a veterans court. So what we saw was that we could change the system because we knew the system. I started out doing defense work, so I knew what the system was. Stephanie was always on the prosecutorial side, but we all understood how the system was rigged against Black and brown people. But once we got in place, we could make things change, and we did.
And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I remember back to when I was a young prosecutor, the proudest thing that anybody could ever say was Star Jones on behalf of the people of the state of New York. And I know that when you left defense work and went over to the prosecutor's office, you know that experience.
Oh, absolutely.
Why was that so important to you?
You know, Star, just as we're talking about today with people like Taylor or George Floyd, everybody wants justice for somebody they love. And so it was a privilege for me to go into a courtroom and stand for the people because no one else would. What's the first thing people said when George Floyd was killed? They wanted justice. So they wanted to be sure someone, not the current prosecutor, they wanted Keith Ellison because they thought he'd be fair. And the same thing with us, even to this very day. When people have problems where their children have been harmed or killed or raped or whatever the case may be, I still have people that call me. I am from this community, and I was Black a long time before I was a prosecutor. And so we're going to make sure that we take care of our people. And to be an advocate for victims, there is no greater calling. That is the best job I have ever had, is to be able to say to some mother, to say to some father or some sister or brother or grandmother, we did the best we could and we made sure the person that harmed your child or your grandchild is going to face whatever the full extent of the law is. There was nothing more prideful for me than to win a case and put someone in jail who should be there. But there was also the pride of saying to these young people who just make mistakes, look, we believe in second chances. And so we're going to help you with a diversion program or a drug program. We're going to get you through this because we know everybody deserves a second chance.
And there's nothing like being, I always call it a public servant victims' rights advocate, because you really do have two parts of your spirit and your soul as a public prosecutor. And, you know, it brings it up. We've all seen, you know, some of the criticism levied at our legal colleague, Senator Kamala Harris, regarding her decades of service as a public servant prosecutor, who's also tasked with speaking for the victims, as you so eloquently pointed out, as district attorney in San Francisco and then attorney general of California. So looking at the dominance of white men among district attorneys and therefore the huge effects that they have on charging and enforcement and plea bargains, how important is it that a person of color actually have a seat at the table in order to change the criminal justice system?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, clearly, we're not always going to do everything the public wants us to do. I mean, there are some things that we cannot change, but there are many things that we can. And anytime we decide that we want to cede the entire justice system to white people, we have lost the battle. We must have people on the inside who know the players, who understand the system, who can work around the system or change the system. You know, we've heard since we were young people, you don't always get a chance to change the system from the outside. You change it from the inside, because that is where you can make your greatest work count. And so I think that I would rather take my chances with a Kamala Harris than I would with some of these white prosecutors who are just looking to put Black people in jail.
And not looking at what additional responsibilities you have. I heard you point out that you were proud of convictions of people who deserved to be punished because of a violent crime against a member of probably our own community. But I do remember being just as proud to dismiss cases when
Bingo.
I thought that there had been some miscarriage of justice.
Absolutely right. And see, the great thing about being a prosecutor is that you can do that before it ever gets to a judge. And so often judges make decisions that we don't like, but we can dismiss cases. Or like I said, we can put these people in diversion programs, gone their whole lives, never made a mistake. We can help them and not let them have a record the rest of their lives. You know, those people who are on drugs, we can give them treatment in lieu of incarceration. We do all those things as prosecutors. People think all we do is put people in jail. We help an awful lot of people not go to jail and get their lives turned around.
Yes, ma'am. And I do want to, before I let you go, I do want you to tell us, where do we stand on the Justice in Policing Act and that legislation that will really lead to some more police accountability?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues within our system. One of the things that the courts have really hampered us by is telling police officers that they don't have to live in the communities they serve. If people forget about the fact that when the Supreme Court said you are not required, even though we pay their salaries, you are not required to live in those communities. So they don't think that they're of the community. The Justice in Policing Act basically says now there's going to be a new level of training. There is going to be a new way that we look at intent. There's going to be a different standard for negligence. There's going to be a different standard for how you arrest, what force, excessive force really is. But where we stand right now is it's sitting in Mitch McConnell's desk in his graveyard going nowhere, like some other 200 pieces of legislation we have passed. They do not care about our people. They are not going to pass a bill that they think is going to hurt what has, in my opinion, the FOP have become almost like the KKK in some instances. I mean, I'm just being real honest with you. They do not care about the people they represent. They are trained to kill. They are not trained to calm situations. They have become a militarized institution. And I think it is up to prosecutors to, when they bring these cases, to give them whatever it takes to say to our prosecutors, look, the police officers in this case were wrong. We need to hold them accountable, just like we hold every single defendant accountable in our system.
Well, Congresswoman, we are just so grateful that you and your colleagues are taking up this mantle. This is something that you've been working on your entire professional career. We are grateful for that. I thank you for your time today, and I thank you for working for us. And you are the true example of why we need somebody on the inside. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'd like to now bring back our criminal justice insiders for a continuation of our conversation. Please welcome back and allow me to formally introduce you to first, Kim Foxx. Kim currently serves as the state's attorney for Cook County, Illinois. She's my state's attorney. She manages the nation's second largest prosecutor's office and oversees an office of approximately 800 attorneys and 1,500 employees. She's the first African-American woman to hold this position. State's Attorney Foxx ran for the state's attorney's office on a platform of criminal justice reform with a real vision towards transforming the Cook County State's Attorney's Office into a fairer, more forward-thinking agency focused on rebuilding the public trust, promoting transparency, and being proactive in making all communities safe. We also have with us Ben Crump, the renowned civil rights attorney who founded the Ben Crump law firm with the abiding belief that justice equals respect. Because of this dedication to justice, the families of Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Martin Lee Anderson, Breonna Taylor, and most recently, George Floyd, all turned to Mr. Crump to turn the spotlight of justice on in these cases. That changing the landscape of civil rights is only half the story. The long struggle for equal justice for all Americans has reached a fever pitch that promises real change in the coming months and years with the help of these insiders. Thank you both for being here. Kim, I'm so glad to see you.
Good
Can you hear me?
You too, Star. I'm sorry, I can hear
Excellent.
you. I'm having all the
Excellent.
technical issues tonight. It's good to see you. Good to see you too, Ken.
Good to see you.
Nice. Nice to see you, Ben. And I want to start where I ended with Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, looking at, to the both of you, looking at the overwhelming dominance of white men among district attorneys and therefore the huge effects they have on charging, enforcement, and plea bargains. How important is it that a person of color have a seat at the table, and not just a seat, but lead the table in changing the criminal justice system, literally from the inside? And Kim, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, it's speak for itself. There are 2,400 elected prosecutors in this country. Less than 1% of them are women of color. In fact, there are only about 30 Black women who lead prosecutors' offices across the country. And when you think about Cook County, for example, 86% of the people who are in our jails in Cook County are Black and Latino. 90% of the young people in our juvenile temporary detention center are Black and Latino. And yet in 2016, I was the first African-American elected to this position on an office that has an overwhelming impact on Black communities here in Cook County. And so it does change when you know the communities that you serve, when you live, to the point that the Congresswoman made, in the communities that have been impacted by these policies. You know, I grew up in public housing. I know what it's like to be a crime victim survivor. I also know what it's like to see people from my community who have done things that we can hold them accountable for, but not throw them away. And so when you don't have people with lived experiences who know and love our communities, you get some of the policies that we've seen that stabilize structural racism for decades. And we need more people, not just at the table, but to your point, Star, setting the menu.
Absolutely. And Ben, I'm going to turn right to you because you were on the front lines of this battle. And I guess you would know better than anyone how important it is to just have a colleague across the table that will even look at issues that surround racism in the criminal justice system.
No doubt about it, Star. And thank you, Star, for hosting this very important conversation, especially with someone as qualified and as intelligent and articulate like my dear friend Kim Foxx, who I believe is one of the most effective state attorneys in America, because she is making sure from the inside, like Kamala Harris did, that the people have a voice inside the room when they close the door. Oftentimes, Star, I've never been a prosecutor. I've never been on the inside of the room to know what is being deliberated, what is being discussed, other than what they're willing to reveal to us as we try to fight to make sure that they live up to the high ideals of America, which says in our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, what I always like to say when I quote that in giving speeches, that means Black people too, because oftentimes I think there are two justice systems in America, one for Black America and one for white America, when we must reach the goal of having equal justice for every citizen in the United States of America, whether that's a dead Black person like Breonna Taylor, where there's no video and the cops are trying to have their narrative accepted as the gospel, when we need to have a prosecutor, somebody like a Kim Foxx, somebody like a Kamala Harris, who understands the life experiences of a Breonna Taylor, understands the life experiences and the community of a George Floyd, to say, no, they get equal consideration too, because we have declared in our Declaration of Independence that they have an equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know, America, you can quote it, but the question is, do you believe it when you say those words? Because we get confused when we see all the little Black and brown children you can so successfully lock up every day and twice on Friday, but yet when a police is accused of doing something nefarious and killing or brutalizing one of the minority members of the community, then it doesn't seem like you can ever get a conviction. So that's what this is about, having somebody on the inside that will speak for all of us, all of our children.
And I want to invite both of you back to continue this conversation. Kim, I remember sitting down thinking, as a prosecutor, you really do have all the marbles. And if you don't open up the game, if you will, someone who has never been involved in the criminal justice system can really get hurt by it. And I love that you have made it a part of your administration that you're going to treat the criminal justice system with equal sense of justice for everybody that walks in the door. And you get criticized for that. Very much like someone who you've identified as your mentor, because I've heard you say numerous times, Senator Kamala Harris has served as a mentor to you in the manner in which you seek to improve our criminal justice system. And our brother Ben, you wrote an op-ed just this week talking about the same topic. I remember her saying to me, and I bet you she said it to you, you change a person's life with the stroke of a pen when you are a public prosecutor. Kim, describe the weight of that statement when it comes to the laws and policies and procedures from your unique position, and then I'll ask Ben to do the same.
Yeah, it is. You have so much power, and so much of that power goes unchecked. The ability for someone to walk into a police station and maybe not come out of a jail cell for years before they go to trial. The prosecutor decides, and you know this all too well, Star, as a former prosecutor, who is charged or who is not charged, what they are charged with, making bail recommendations. Before someone even gets before a judge in Cook County, it is the prosecutor's office who says, bring them there. We have the ability with prosecutorial discretion to say, no, not this one. Give this person diversion. Give this person a chance. And you're right. You know, Senator Harris, when she was running for the Senate, I was running for my first term, took time out of her campaign trail to sit down with me and lay out the awesome responsibilities that we have, not just prosecutors, but as prosecutors of color, to be as thoughtful as we can about the impact that our decisions have on our communities. And so her vision for progressive prosecution predated where we are now. She was a visionary, a leader, and continues to lead, not just me, but other Black women prosecutors across the country who get knocked around pretty heavily when we lead by those values. Because you're right, I get a lot of criticism, as the Congresswoman said, from the FOP and others who say that the way that we approach this by being fair and intentional about not causing harm, particularly to Black communities, that shakes it up. And that makes people uncomfortable. But that's the charge that we have. And you're right, my mentor, Kamala Harris, has said to me, you know, so long as you are on the right side, so long as justice is in your view, you must do what is right at all times. And I'm grateful for her leadership. And I share Attorney Crump's, and I believe yours as well, belief that we need that type of leadership at all levels, the inside game in prosecutors' offices, as well as in the White House.
Oh, absolutely. No question whatsoever. And Ben, I would love for you to describe, because Kim, from one perspective, from your perspective, when you say you can change a person's life with the stroke of a pen, I would love for you to take people inside just how it does change your life. Because I remember, if you just say, I'm going to arrest this person now, even if you dismiss it with a disorderly conduct 48 hours later, in those 48 hours, you can change a person's trajectory. Am I right, Ben?
Absolutely. And you know, I will say this, when I listen to Kim Foxx, now I am biased. I think she's doing an incredible job in Chicago. I think about Aramis Ayala in Orlando, Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore. It not only matters having a strong person of color, Star, it really matters having a strong woman of color. These strong Black women are following in the footsteps of Senator Kamala Harris, who was the first Black Attorney General from California, which we know is the largest state in America. And so she is so qualified to be the vice president of the United States, because when she was in the room, she was strategically and effectively making changes. And Star, you know how difficult it is to change a lot of people who don't share our life experiences, don't come from our community, opinions on what is the strategy to most effectively serve the entire community, not just one side of the community that historically has always been given the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of consideration, the benefit of possibility. So when you talk about changing somebody's life with one stroke of a pen, it really comes down to when you go in any courtroom in America, worse than how Trayvon Martin was killed in Sanford, Florida, Star, worse than how Michael Brown was killed with his hands up in Ferguson, Missouri, worse than how 12-year-old Tamir Rice was killed in Cleveland, Ohio, playing on the playground, worse than how Breonna Taylor was executed in her own apartment, worse than how Botham Jean, who was eating ice cream in his own apartment in Dallas, Texas, was killed, worse than how Laquan McDonald was killed running away from the police, this 17-year-old kid who was shot all those times in the back and all those police officers lied, worse than Philando Castile in Minneapolis, worse than Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, worse than Eric Gardner, the first I Can't Breathe case in Staten Island, New York, worse than Sandra Bland, and the list goes on and on, worse than Ahmaud Arbery, worse than George Floyd, who had that knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, is how they kill our people in courtrooms in every city, in every state, every day with these trumped up felony convictions. And when you just sit in the back of the courtroom, Star, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you don't have to take Ben Crump's word for it. You can just watch how they administer justice when you have little white boys and girls who come up with very similar fact patterns as little black and brown boys and girls. Now you see the state attorneys and the prosecutors agree to give the little white kids a slap on the wrist, and they are escorted out the courtroom to live out the fulfillment of their destiny that God has for them, and have every opportunity at achieving the American dream. And then you see those little black children, those young people are taken to the corner of the courtroom, fingerprinted, handcuffed, and convicted of a felony conviction. And once you have a felony conviction, your life is over completely. But why is it that that prosecutor would give the benefit of the doubt and consideration to the little white boys and girls and the young white men and women, but won't give it to the minorities? And that's what Kamala understands so uniquely. And that's what we have to have at the highest level of our governments so we can stop this legalized genocide of colored people in America.
Well, I don't think anybody could make it more eloquent than how you have just laid it out. You know, and there are balances that I know you strike every day, both of you. Kim, how do you actually, as a prosecutor, weigh your responsibility to seek justice and give voice to the victims, but still effectuate policy that benefits the whole community?
Yeah, you know, our mandate is to seek justice. And we live in a community right now, Star, that has been struggling with violence, gun violence that is particularly horrific this summer. And so for me, making sure that our community is safe is at the forefront of what I do. And doing that means that we have to use the weight of our office to go after those who are causing harm to our communities. But it would surprise people if I told you that when I took office in 2016, it was the bloodiest year at that time since 1999. And the number one referred prosecution in our office wasn't guns, wasn't murders, wasn't shootings. It was retail theft. It was shoplifting. because Illinois had one of the lowest felony thresholds for shoplifting in the country at $300. So we were spending a lot of our policing and prosecutorial resources not going after those who were causing harm to our community. Second, 40% of the cases that come through the state's attorney's office prior to COVID were drug cases. Of those, 60% were possessing. So we were talking about people who have addiction issues. And we know, and the conversation has shifted to Attorney Crump's point, that when the opioid crisis hit the suburbs, and there were a lot of more affluent people who were falling victim to overdoses, then it was a public health crisis. Even though it looked eerily similar to what we saw with crack cocaine in the 80s and 90s, and where the war on drugs decimated communities, we were now talking about compassionate care for people who were addicted to drugs. And so for me, it has been about, why are we spending our time, energy, and resources off of the easiest things that we can do? We can easily catch people who have fallen through the cracks of our social network, social justice network, around education, housing, mental illness. Those are the folks we can easily catch. When you have a homicide clearance rate in the city of Chicago that's less than 20%, that means that 8 out of 10 people who commit a murder will not be arrested. A shooting clearance rate of less than 10%, about 5% of people who pull the trigger and shoot someone are caught. And yet we spend more time going after people who have mental illness, poverty issues, who have conditions that we could deal with outside of the justice system. So that's how I make the balance, is I'm not going to waste the people's time and energy going after things that don't affect public safety, and utilizing our energy around our gun crime strategies unit and making sure that we can make communities where that violence is at the highest safer. Because the people who are dying, the overwhelming majority of these deaths in our city are young Black men and young Black women. We have had over 50 children, Black children, who have been killed this year. And we need all hands on deck to deal with that, and not these petty Annie things that get too many people caught up in our system and find their way stuck forever with those felony convictions that they don't need to have, and lead to more criminality. And so that's how I make the balance. How do we keep our community safe, and how do we stop needlessly getting people wrapped up in our justice system that don't need to be there?
And Ben, I could see you. Thank you, Kim. I can see you shaking your head yes throughout what she was saying, and she was just identifying how a young person can get caught in the system and literally be like a hamster spinning around in a wheel and never be able to get out of that system.
Exactly, Star. And I know two things. Number one, and I'm sure Senator Harris talked with Kim about it as well, where they had this program that she started while she was the district attorney in San Francisco, where if you had that first strike, but yet you went to school and you didn't get any more trouble, then they just erased it away. So we weren't going to hold one mistake to brand you as a convicted felon for the rest of your life, because sometimes young people are not equipped to make the best decisions. That's why they're young. It's a terrible thing, Star, when you really think about it, to have a youthful indiscretion when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And for the rest of your life, you can never get out of this vicious cycle, because you don't have understanding state attorneys who don't want to say you have no redeeming qualities for society, like Kim Foxx. You have these prosecutors who say, there's nothing good you can do now that we got you this one time. That is a terrible mentality to have as a prosecutor. And I think about Congresswoman Fudge, and I know her and the colleagues in the House wrote the George Floyd Justice and Policing Accountability Act, and Senator Harris and Senator Cory Booker took the lead in trying to craft the companion bills in the U.S. Senate. And when we testified before the United States Congress, George Floyd's brother Philonise and I remember telling them, this is our opportunity, Star. In the aftermath of this George Floyd video that has been seen billions of times now around the world. YouTube alone said it was seen over 1 billion times. And so you can only imagine how this video has galvanized people, not just across America, but across the world, saying, until we get justice for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. And so this is an opportunity right here. We can't lose this moment. And that's why we have to talk about making systematic reform in policing in America to change the culture and the behavior of policing in America. But it just doesn't stop with the police. It's our entire criminal justice system. The police are the low people on the totem pole. The prosecutors have so much power. You're talking about a stroke of a pen. I mean, Kim, I can't even think how many lives she has impacted by just seeing them as a child who made a mistake and not seeing them as somebody not worthy of consideration. And so that's what we got to keep fighting for if we're ever going to get the systematic reform to elect people like Kim Foxx, like Kamala Harris, like Marilyn Mosby. We got to vote like our life depended on it. And last thing I'll say, we got to change this moment into a movement. We have to change the pain that we feel for Breonna and Ahmaud and George Floyd into power. And we have to absolutely change all these protests into policy.
Absolutely. And I could be clapping my hands right now because I would like actually Kim to take us back to 2014, because I think our past really and truly impacts on what our president, our future is. So Laquan McDonald was murdered in 2014. And how did the immediate response and handling impact your move to run for state's attorney in 2016, which is when I moved to Chicago? And how does that then compare to what we're fighting now with police brutality against Black and brown bodies? Because it seems like there's some spree every 2 to 4 years. And then we get a whole nother group, and then it breaks our heart. But I think, to Ben's point, we're at the point where we're not just talking, we're not just protesting, we're getting action.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Star. When Laquan was killed in 2014, he wasn't a known entity like he became. It was one of these where on the local news the next day, they said it was a police-involved shooting. Young man, wielding a knife was taken down. And no one thought anything else about it. It wasn't for a few months later into 2015, after dogged journalism, where they were able to get the autopsy report, were able to get video that wasn't available, that you saw that the narrative didn't match up. And then there was a lot of noise that was around it. At the same time, so it was about April of 2015, you had a Marilyn Mosby out in Baltimore who had charged in the Freddie Gray case. And for a number of people, it was shocking to see that police were actually going to be held accountable. That was also in the same spirit of what happened with Mike Brown in St. Louis and Ferguson. And so it was just like this, where it felt like there were these cases after cases. In the same way that we're talking about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, we were being hit with Laquan McDonald, Freddie Gray, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice. And the activism that we saw in Chicago gave way for people to say, well, whose job is it to hold the police accountable? Because in that whole period of time, the former state's attorney didn't do anything, did not move anything. And much like we're seeing now with the protest in Louisiana or in Louisville, the activists would not let it go. And that tension then had a series of events where the video was finally released. The state's attorney only charged that case within hours after that video being released. But that was because of the movement in the streets. And then the race changed fundamentally. I jumped in because I saw Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore with Freddie Gray and said, what would happen if we had that type of leadership here? What would happen if we were unafraid to take on these types of cases and do what's right? And so she was an inspiration for me in the same way that Senator Harris was an inspiration for me. And the movement of the people, because I'm just one vote, right? I couldn't get myself into office. It was the demand for something different from the people of Chicago, the people of Cook County, who said not enough. So to Ben's point, they took protests into the booth. They voted. Young people voted in numbers that we had not seen in a prosecutor's race. People usually drop off. They vote for their senator, they vote for the president, and then they don't want to keep going through that ballot. They stayed on that ballot for prosecutor. And that's why this is really important tonight, because there are races across the country where we can see an immediate impact from what we're seeing related to George Floyd. We can see an immediate impact in the voting booth, not just at the top. And we need to get to the top. We need to get this president out of here who has just been not even surface talking about these issues, parading our city as a whipping post, talking about he cares about violence in Chicago when he doesn't care about these people who are dying here, because he'll call them a thug in one breath and say we love them in the next. They don't care about that. So we need to make sure that this movement does continue. It does continue in the streets, but it has to continue in the courtrooms. It has to continue at the highest levels, and they can do that in November.
Absolutely. And to just go back, since we went to 2014 to sort of give us the history lesson, just this week, Ben, we've seen some new footage that further supports the charges for the senseless murder of George Floyd. I mean, it's fair to say, as Kim said, the racial divide has widened under this current administration, which has, of course, led to calls for civil rights and justice to be at an all-time high. With this level of engagement, interest, and involvement, where are we now, sir? What do we need to do to move this needle from activism to action?
Well, just to make mention of that video, Star.
Yes, of course.
It is very emblematic of the way Black people all across America feel. Because remember, George Floyd was alleged to have committed a nonviolent felony of a $20 bill being counterfeit. That nobody knows to this day that if it was counterfeit or if he knew it was counterfeit. And George, was still there. He could have fled if he thought he had committed a crime. He was still there sitting in his car, and you saw those Black people in the community that came out in this recently leaked video. But was so appalling is that this was a nonviolent crime, but the police came with their guns drawn and tapped on the window, on the glass. And what was George's response? When he saw a police officer with a gun pulled, he immediately said, "Please don't shoot me. Sir, please don't shoot me." Because when Black people see police pull guns, it normally does not end well for us. He had all kind of anxiety. And that is the anxiety that many marginalized people of color feel every day when they are confronted by police. We have this mentality through the data and the history that says they protect and serve certain people in the community, but then others, they just police and brutalize. And so when George Floyd was saying, "Please don't shoot me," he was speaking for all of America, almost like Reverend Al said at his eulogy, get your knee off my neck. That is what Black America has been saying to America since we got here. Get your knee off our neck. And so we have to use this, Star Jones, to try to say, America, we're better than this. We can't continue to exercise in our courtrooms and our institutions of justice this intellectual justification of discrimination. This notion that they keep saying, "Oh, well, it's legal." Whereas Dr. King said, just because it's legal, that doesn't make it right. Everything that Hitler did to the Jews in Germany was legal, but that didn't make it right. Slavery was legal. That didn't make it right. Segregation was legal, that didn't make it right. We cannot let legality be the standard for our morality. We are better than this, and we know in our heart what is right. And the right thing to do is to let people who care about our citizens, all of our citizens, like Kim Foxx, like Kamala Harris, like Marilyn Mosby, and God knows, Star Jones, if you ever want to take a pay cut and leave your influential position, we need you to run for DA of New York. I understand that they are now issuing search warrants against activists in New York today.
See, you trying to start something, Ben, of course. But I know you. I've known you too long for that. But actually, you bring up the point. The people that are going to make the change are the people who get elected. And so I'm going to bring back Chris Scott from the collective, because I think Chris can help us put a perspective about what the collective is doing to make sure Black and brown people are key players in these critical positions within the criminal justice system. Because I think Kim was the one who pointed out, you have to make sure down ballot is focused on also. It's the people who are the prosecutors and the sheriffs and those people who are going to be making charging decisions and arresting decisions. So, Chris, you take it away on that one.
Well, I am very happy where you started. Actually, today we've invested and endorsed over 125 candidates this cycle. When you look at that, 67% of those candidates are down ballot races. And since 2016, when Stephanie Brown James and Quentin James started the Collective PAC, we've elected over 55 candidates at every level of government across this country. And we've done that by recruiting and training and investing time and financial resources into these candidates. But we know when we're talking about criminal justice, it requires an added layer of intentional and unapologetic support, because we know that the vitriol that Black candidates face, particularly Black women face, is unparalleled. Just look at State's Attorney Kim Foxx and what she faced in her primary from the FOP, from opposing forces. Look at Kim Gardner and what she faced, death threats and sanctions from all around. So beyond the recruiting and the training aspect of it, we have to have a new level of support for these candidates so that they know that they are not by themselves. And I think when we do that, to quote Kim Foxx, as I've always heard her say, when we do that, we will have more candidates that know that they need to change the criminal justice system to live up to the justice part of its name as much as it lives up to the criminal part of its name right now.
Well, you know that you're preaching to the choir here. And Kim, I saw some of the challenges that you face. I think the community having a prosecutor's back, especially when they're a person of color and are really at the table making policy decisions, is absolutely critical. You pointed out earlier that 95% of the prosecutors are white, only 1% are women of color. How did we get here, and how do we close that gap quickly? Because we're going to need to close it quickly.
We have to be real intentional about it. We have to, we got here with intentionality, right? Those who had the most to gain by having white men run the system that had a disproportionate impact on Black communities, there was intentionality about it. And so how we get out of it is what we're doing tonight, is a real intentional plan by saying, one, we have to recruit and find Black people to run for these offices. Now, you know, Star, when you were a former prosecutor, not many of us who work in these offices. A lot of us feel like the most impact we can have is we're going to go be the next Ben Crump. And we need all the Ben Crumps, but we also need people in these offices who have that power, like I said in the beginning, to charge or not charge. Ben only comes once we do something. Yeah. And so we need as many people in this office to be able to bring progressive values as we do on the defense side. Because we can't just keep reacting to prosecutors. We can't just keep responding. We have to be in the positions of power to be able to make real fundamental change. And then we have to protect them. Chris is right. The vitriol that particularly the Black women have seen who've done these jobs, whether it's Aramis Ayala getting a noose sent to her office, Aramis, a contemporary of mine, first Black state attorney in the entire state of Florida, and said that she wasn't going to pursue the death penalty and got death threats and nooses sent to her office. Kim Gardner, who charged the white couple who pulled guns out on peaceful protesters, had the weight of the president and the FOP and everyone coming after her, death threats. The sad reality is Marilyn Mosby, myself, Kim Gardner, all of us will sit in a room and talk about the death and the hate mail that we get. They come hard for us. And this tactic is to scare and intimidate people like ourselves from getting into these roles. And doing this, not just as a Black woman, but unapologetically so. If you know anything about me, I'm not going to mention my work without talking about I'm from Cabrini. And I know people who come from the projects who live this experience, and I'm here for them. And when you are here for a constituency that this wasn't built for, then they come hard. So we got to recruit, we got to retain, and we got to protect. And that's how you get more. If I saw Kamala and I saw Marilyn and then I saw myself in them and I ran, and then someone runs because they saw me, it's just like those commercials. And then I told two people and they told two people. We get more and more. But we only do that when we're successful in keeping them there and beating back the vitriol and showing when they come that we have a squad behind us to keep us protected.
And bringing that squad is absolutely imperative, Ben. I want you to talk for just a minute as we're starting to wrap down. Why is there a disconnect with Black voters in recognizing the impact of having representation when it comes to prosecutors, attorney generals, and even Supreme Court justices? It's that there's seems to be a bit of a disconnect. When I can tell you honestly, of every job I've ever had, my job as a prosecutor is the one I bring up the most. It's the thing that made me the proudest because I saw what I could actually do to impact on people's lives.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why when Kim was running, even before I got to know how incredible a person she was firsthand, I was president of the National Bar Association. And it was right when I was working on Michael Brown and Tamir Rice, these incredibly high profile cases. But I thought it was important enough that all the Black people who I was getting the social media messages from in Chicago, that, hold on, you supporting me when I'm in St. Louis, that's hundreds of miles from Chicago and Cleveland. What we need to be doing is making sure we support Kim Foxx, who is fighting for reform in the aftermath of Laquan McDonald. And we came and it was a church packed stuff. And that's when people still didn't think Kim could do it. That was a lot of candidates there. I came and not only did I come and really support her like we have to do our candidates who we know are going to be the change makers. I mean, going to be the people who our grandmother prayed about. And I knew that what Kim Foxx was going to be, but then I also wrote checks. You have to give money. It can't just be about you lip service. You have to be fully committed. And because of that last question you just asked me, understanding the power of a prosecutor. I mean, the number one law enforcement agent in that community, the person who can override the police on a daily basis. That's what the disconnect is. Sometimes our people don't understand that we don't just have to accept that there's going to be a white man, mostly white men, in these prosecutorial roles. And because of that, we say, well, they're the enemy. We don't just dislike the person. We dislike the position because what it represents. But if we have the and compassion, I know we're winding down, and the vision of our ancestors who could visualize, who could dream about a Kim Foxx, who could dream about a Senator Kamala Harris, a Congresswoman Marcia Fudge. They kept working in the cotton fields. They kept cleaning hotel rooms like my mama. They kept getting on the early bus, as Reverend Jesse Jackson said, because they knew that one day there would be a Kim Foxx. They knew there would be a Kamala Harris, and they knew that person could be a prosecutor, and we would get different results than what we had come to accept historically in America. And so that's what it's about. And we have precedents on our side, like they all teach us in first year law school. The precedents for Black people in America is literally this: no matter what they throw at us, we're going to overcome it. We overcame slavery. We overcame the Middle Passage. We overcame Dred Scott decision that said there was no rights that a Black man had that a white man was bound to respect. We overcame Jim Crow. We overcame it all. And so I'm confident with people like Kim Foxx, Senator Kamala Harris, Star Jones using her influence, Chris Scott, and the Collective PAC. We're going to overcome whatever they throw at us today. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we will overcome it.
And we have Ben Crump that leads the way. I have to tell you, sir, I could just listen to you talk all the time, every time. And knowing that this comes from your heart, you go to sleep at night thinking about these issues, you wake up in the morning thinking about these issues, and you inspire so many people around the country to do the same thing. And Kim, I just like to tell you how important it is for the work that you are doing, not just in Chicago, but across this country, for other young girls to see that they too could take on this mantle and get their back straight up, and that there will be people to support them. I just thank you all so very much for your time this evening. It's been a magnificent time. And Chris, I'd love for you to give us some closing remarks and provide a call to action. Thank Ben, thank Kim, and of course the collective. But Chris, can you tell us what we got to do? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for being a prime example for me. I was talking about my contemporaries, but watching you on court TV, watching you as a Black prosecutor and analyst, holding it down, showing us what we could do. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for setting the standard so long ago. So thank you. And Ben, I love you. You know
this.
Well, look, Star, Ben, Kim, thank you so much for everything that you all do. I think if anything, this was a much needed sermon. It was literally a sermon discussion tonight. And for us, I think it reminds us that justice is always on the ballot. And this November, we have to be willing to get out there and vote. Because if we want to change these laws, we have to begin to change the lawmakers. And so when you look at the collective PAC and the over 125 candidates that we've endorsed this year, they don't get there unless you actually go out and vote in November. We can protest, and that's great pressure, but we have to take the next step and transform that into electoral power and make sure that we are putting the people in office that we know are going to pull the people that are closest to the pain closer to the power at the end of the day. So again, thank you, State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Thank you, Ben. And thank you so much, Star, for moderating this discussion. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, everybody that is watching, make sure you go to thecollectivepac.org, find out about our candidates, support our work, but really support building Black political power across this country.